Wait a minute. This isn't my world. Disappointed!
1, 2, 3. Beautiful.
That was a lot better than yesterday.
Yeah, that was
my fault.
way
I was
cleaner.
like joking around because I didn't.
No, we
get
know
it.
it was your fault.
I didn't get it, so I was just. All right.
All right, let's do it.
Wait. Let me read the line in my head once. Okay. All right. Hey guys. Hey guys. Welcome to the. Oh crap. All right. Hey guys. I got too close to the screen. You can edit this stuff out, right?
We'll see.
Welcome to Reoriented, where we voice evangelical perspectives that get lost in the mainstream. I am Daniel He, and I'm here with Andrew Huang and Stephen Choi. This is our first episode. We are, I'm a little nervous, but we're going to have a lot of fun, and not just that. I'm really excited about the show ahead of us, but because it is our first episode, why don't we just go around and I think it'd be cool if we just share personally like why we're even doing this in the first place. So I don't know, Steven, do you want to start and just share with us? Tell us a little bit about yourself too. Tell us who you are and why you're doing this.
All right, thanks. Yeah, my name is Stephen Choi. I am a former youth pastor and young adult pastor at Orange Korean Evangelical Church. So ministered.
Hey, that's a great church.
It's average.
It's awesome.
Get out of here, Andrew.
Yeah, so 6 years of pastoral ministry background, and starting in October of last year, my wife and I moved out to Asia, in specifically Vietnam, where I am working as a Christian professional at a digital marketing company, and currently we're in Taiwan. We had just had our first baby, and we came to Taiwan just for medical care, and ended up getting stuck here because all the borders are closed. So just a little bit about why I wanted to do this. I think this whole coronavirus pandemic has highlighted for me a disconnect that I feel with kind of the available media options. I think the conservative sort of media, tends to cater more towards, Christian evangelicals in America. But on the other hand, they kind of don't always have the best information, or at least they, definitely have a slant. And likewise with the liberal media,
That's offensive, bro.
no racism intended there, but. On the other hand, the liberal media maybe tends to give better information, but I also find it sort of dissatisfying as a Christian because it totally lacks the faith perspective that I want to have that lens on how to process everything that's going on around us. And so I wanted to start this show because I feel like there's a space, like a void, I guess, for Christians who want to have meaningful conversations, who want to have good information, but at the same time want to view things through a biblical lens.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very thorough and very good. Andrew, please tell us about yourself, who you are and why you're here.
My name's Andrew Huang. I'm also a pastor. I'm an EM pastor at a smaller Korean church in La Crescenta. We're called Good Church.
It's a pretty good church.
Yeah, it's all right. We're part of the same denomination as OKC, and so that's all about me. The reason why I think I'm very interested in this thing we're trying to do is I don't really like Christian media in general. I don't like Christian music or movies.
What?
Or news sources or anything like that. I think a big problem with the church is we tend to not listen to opposing voices or listen to opinions that make us uncomfortable, or we get very defensive when people try to encroach on what we think are our rights or our pet projects or pet ideas. And so this is a cool place where I hope we can talk about varied perspectives on, very complicated issues. I'm sure we're underqualified to talk about these, but it's going to be fun to talk about them and just try to navigate these very complex issues with, three common mans in different places in different stages in life. And so I think it'd be a cool time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that. I'll go. As I said earlier, I'm Daniel He. I'm also a pastor. We're all pastors, which, as Andrew said, maybe that doesn't qualify us to be like the experts on some of these topics, but I think we're just going to try to be asking good questions, and especially to people who hopefully are experts in their respective fields, and just people who probably know a lot more about whatever they're talking about than we do. I've been serving at Orange Creen Evangelical Church for about 7 years now. Andrew, Stephen, and I are all really good friends. Stephen and I actually grew up at that church, and we both came back to be the pastors there, which was really, I'm sure, strange for everyone who's there. But thankfully, it's been a really great experience. And just for me, I think, for me, coronavirus, when all this happened, I found myself, just to be really honest with you guys, I found myself just feeling super ill-equipped to react, and uninformed, and honestly just ignorant about a lot of things. And I didn't feel like there were a lot of resources for me, kind of like what Stephen was already talking about. So I'm just doing this with these two awesome guys because I'm hoping that some of the stuff that we talk about can become a resource that helps people navigate through the various issues that they face as they're just trying to glorify God and love people and serve people. And there's some wisdom required. So hopefully we can become a resource for that. And hopefully this first episode is going to help you. And I think it will. We're interviewing someone who's just a really awesome guy. And I'm actually going to pass over to Stephen to introduce the topic for today and our guest for today. So why don't you go ahead, Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just want to clarify, we're not a coronavirus show or a coronavirus podcast. I mean, we're just going to be talking about each episode. We're going to be talking about faith, culture, society, things that are relevant and that should be talked about. Obviously, one of the hot button issues right now is coronavirus. And today's guest is actually a mental health expert. His name is Dr. George Hu. And we want to be talking, he's actually practices clinical psychology in China. And so we asked him to come onto the show and bring his perspective as a American clinical psychologist trained in the US, but practicing in China, which is obviously, where the epidemic started. So let's bring him on.
Clap on 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh my God. That's fine.
I didn't know how to do it.
That was good. I could use those.
Wait, I still don't get why we're clapping. What's the point of that again?
It helps me find the audio and start it at the right place.
Oh.
Come on.
I thought we were welcoming the spirit, but that's
Okay, our first guest is Dr. George Hu. George is the chief of mental health at Pudong Shanghai Family United Hospital, and also the president of the Shanghai International Mental Health Association. Did I get that right? Okay, perfect. George, thank you so much for joining us. Would you mind kind of just introducing yourself a little bit and telling us about what you do?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm from the States. I'm a licensed psychologist in California and Hawaii. And my family and I, my wife and 2 kids, 2 boys, have been living here in China since 2013, so over 7 years now. In Beijing and Shanghai. And, like Stephen said, I'm the chief of mental health at United Family Pudong Hospital, where I have a department consisting of psychologists and psychiatrists, and we do a bunch of mental health work, including individual and couple psychotherapy, assessment services, I'm also the president of the Shanghai International Mental Health Association. And so we do a lot of mental health work really all around the country, especially in this kind of coronavirus pandemic situation. We've been doing a lot of online work with different people in many cities actually around China and also around the world. And I work with, Chinese people. I work with international people. I speak both English and Chinese and what they call an ABC. So I, was born and raised in California, but I'm of Chinese descent and I speak Chinese. And so I work mostly actually with the Chinese speaking population here. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
What we also do is we also equip and train lay staff in the churches to meet the mental health needs of their congregations.
Awesome.
Really cool. I think there's a lot that we could talk about. Are you kind of specifically, how has your work been impacted by the pandemic, if at all?
Well, it's hard to say because we're pretty busy. I will say, though, that since the pandemic happened, we've been doing a lot more online services just because people, maybe have various degrees of comfort coming into a hospital, or they live in Wuhan, or they live in some other area where they need an online platform to access services, or they've been evacuated out to different places, different countries around the world, and they need services. So we've been doing a lot more online services, but man, mental health here, and we can talk about this later, is a limited commodity. So, my schedule is booked. My first appointment, right now, today's May 1st out here in China. My first available appointment is May 28th. So
Wow.
it's a pretty, it's pretty busy for us.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you kind of get people to get past that cultural stigma or that sense of shame of, hey, I need help with this?
I try to help in my work. I view the majority of my work in helping people separate truth from lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like Jesus promised, right, the truth will always set you free, right? In the end, it's your friend and it's going to set you free. Although it's hard to swallow, it could be painful, it could bring you through the valley of the shadow of death, but it is going to set you free. He promised that. So we have to separate truth from lie, and we should always walk toward truth, right? And so part of the lie, I think, is that if people are experiencing mental health difficulties, that lie, part of the lie that there's something wrong with you, right? Like that's worse than if you had a flu, right? If you had cancer even, right? For which of course you would go and seek help and you would try to find a professional and you would go to a doctor or whatever. But if you have a mental health issue, no, see, that's different. That's like something real wrong with you. You're crazy. You're extra sinful. God is punishing you. Like there's all sorts of lies, right? There's all kinds of lies that people believe about it. And that lie sometimes can prevent them from seeking help. The lie can start to infect communities around them, right? And deteriorate those communities, whether that community is a family, a church, a school, whatever, right? And it's a lie. And part of what I help people to do is kind of deconstruct that lie and say, no, the truth is probably that you're experiencing, right, a mental health challenge, right? And if we're able to accept that, if we're able to swallow that, then there's help for you and for us. And another part of that lie, and a very important part of that lie, is if I'm experiencing a mental health challenge, I'm the only one, right? Or I'm that rare psycho breed or something, right? But in reality, you're not, right? Studies show, at least in the States, that most people have met criteria for a mental health challenge, right? A mental health disorder in the United States of some sort. Most people, right? We don't say that of cancer, we don't say that of emphysema, asthma, whatever, right? Like we don't say that. You know, another part of the lie is if there's something wrong with like the organ that's inside your head, that's something fundamentally different from the organ that's inside your chest, right? Or the organ, and that's a lie, right? That's I don't know where it came from. It's made up, right? It's not from the Bible. It's not from God, right? It's from somebody somewhere, and it keeps people from getting help.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I wish we could talk even more, just kind of at length about kind of, just kind of how do you. Sometimes I wonder, how do you diagnose the difference between what might be, say, a mental health issue versus how do we know that there is or isn't like a spiritual component? Actually, maybe you could, talk about that a little bit. Like, is that something that you've thought about? Like, is there a way to kind of bifurcate or to tell when there is a spiritual component versus a mental component?
I mean, there's a spiritual component, I believe, really to everything, right? But I think what you're asking is, how can somebody separate, oh, this is like a character issue or a sin issue, right? Versus this is a mental health problem, right? And I don't know that the line is that bright. I really don't, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that somebody might have a stronghold, right, that keeps them from repentance or keeps them from going to God or something like that. I mean, is that, it's not so much important why that is. It's more important what we're going to do, like what the goal is for that person, right? And how can we move them along that goal, right? If their goal is, hey, I want to get over this issue so that I can move on with my life, so I can move on with my relationship with God, so I can move on with my relationship with my wife or my church or whoever, right? Then it's not as important what we call it, like potato. It's more important what we're going to do about it and how we're going to move you forward.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's good.
Obviously the outbreak started in China, and so in some ways, China is sort of, a predictor maybe of certain things that might happen in other parts of the world. Have there been particular kind of mental health challenges or patterns that you've been seeing in China as people deal either with coronavirus specifically or with just the impacts of being locked down and quarantined?
Yeah, I mean, there's some initial data now coming out, right? Like we have to understand that yeah, you're right. China was in quarantine and in various stages of lockdown for a lot longer than other places, right? Since early February, to one extent or the other. Actually, Wuhan was locked down before that. So in mid-January. So to one extent or the other, and the Wuhan lockdown was just lifted a few weeks ago, right? It wasn't. It was only very recently that lockdown was lifted, and it's still lifting, right, in stages. So in some ways, China can be a predictor, like we're sort of a couple months ahead of the process, but China's a very different place than much of the rest of the world, right? So we have to acknowledge that too, and we can talk more about that. But in terms of like what we're seeing in terms of mental health needs, there's been some initial studies coming out of Wuhan and Hubei province, especially among kids, that shows an increase in depressive symptoms, right, among children. One study showed that there was almost 30% of children who responded to the survey indicated depressive symptoms, meeting the criteria of a depressive disorder. So that's significant. But this study is super interesting. This study also pointed out that there were things that protected kids, right? So the big question is, how do kids who go through the same situation, right, respond differently? Why do some get depression and some don't? That's a $100,000 question, right? And this study started to point out that children with a certain mindset, children who viewed this pandemic as something that they could overcome, or that we, however you define we, right, could overcome, were protected from depressive symptoms. And we see this pattern a lot in mental health. We see this with stress, right? For example, stress response was a very famous study that was released a few years ago that showed that people who believed stress was bad for you were several times more likely to die, not just get sick, not just whatever, but die of a stress-related problem.
Wow.
Typically cardiovascular, right? So like what protected them was the belief that stress is good for you, right? And that means that one of the leading causes of death, at least in the United States, is a belief, the belief that stress is bad for you, right?
Wow.
That was what separated people in their terms of their response. We see the same thing to some extent in traumatic disorders, post-traumatic stress responses, right? What protects people who go through the same thing from post-traumatic stress disorder versus people who get it, you know, it's also a belief, right? Or a conception of what is happening. Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Yeah.
We should all study psychology. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
want
now
to
that you
now.
say it, it's like intuitive, but you never, people don't think that way.
So I wonder if that has implications kind of as Christians, as pastors. I feel like a lot of the response that I've been seeing from Christians is, hey, this will be over soon, you know, or God will protect us. And as more Christians start getting sick, you know, or as kind of the uncertainty around how long this is going to be with us, I wonder if maybe we need to start shifting the way we talk about it. Like George, from your perspective, what are some ways that like, I guess, what are things that you think Christians should be, how should Christians be talking about coronavirus and addressing, you know, addressing lockdown and quarantine and things like that from your perspective in mental health?
I think from my perspective, I think one of the, you know, we have to, in certain parts of the world, we have to go through, right, a quarantine. We have to go through a lockdown. You know, of course, here in China, where it started, you know, to various degrees, we had to all go through this. But I think as Christians, what we can do is we can actually push a different narrative, right? What is God trying to do, right? That's positive through this. What is God trying to show us? What is God trying to do in my heart, right? And maybe what that is trying to see how we can help our fellow man, our fellow brother and sister, how we can live out the gospel, right? In this context. I think that, you know, science, non-Christian science, right, has shown us that one of the protective factors from a lot of the negative symptoms that result from either this issue or others is an others-focused mentality, right? That Jesus modeled for us, you know, from the beginning, right? And I believe really that because we are all under and subject, right, and, you know, as part of God's creation, you know, the mental health science and the mental health data really, you know, follows our created design, which is that what protects our mental health is an others-focused mentality. So what is God, how can God use me? How can God use us, whatever the us is, my family, my church, my small group, you know, my community? How can God use us to be a blessing to other people? And I think that could be a huge focus. Instead of how are my rights being restricted? How am I being negatively impacted, right? As real as those things are, right? As real as the negative impact is, whether that's physical or financial or emotional, right? We should also expand our thinking to include what is God trying to do through me, you know, in this situation. We should include that as well.
For sure. Yeah, I mean that almost is so basic that, you know, it's kind of funny that it needs to be said explicitly, but no, that's so true. I mean,
yeah, it needs to be said because, you know what, like fear is powerful now. Fear, like, and this virus, right? Like, talk about like triggering fear, and fear and insecurity are what humans do not do well with, and Americans don't do well with. Right? We are not used to, as Americans, feeling all that fearful, right? We've never fought a war in our own territory since what? The American Revolution, right? I mean, we fought a civil war. We've fought plenty of stuff outside, but we've never been threatened, ourselves. We, especially our
Yeah.
generation, we don't, we grow up in this bubble, right? And now there's this unseen, invisible pathogen out there, and people are scared, and people respond to that fear by closing up, right? Protecting me, right? And closing that circle as much as possible. To some extent, that's necessary, right? We need to social distance, right? Because we don't want to be breathing and coughing on each other and spreading whatever it is. So that makes sense to some extent. But we also have to come out, at least mentally, out of that and say, all right, in my context right now, how can I bless others? How can I love others? What does God want to do through me?
I have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Well, I completely agree with this, what we can tell the church and how we can kind of interpret what's going on to Christians. But I mean, I'm assuming that you probably have non-Christian clients as well. And so in that case, especially for those actually suffering, how do you, I guess, kind of translate what's going on in a hopeful way? But I mean, sometimes you can't mention God because that wouldn't make sense to people without that context. So
I mean, but it's in the exact same way that we're talking about. What I do is I try to separate truth from lie, and I try to introduce what I call cognitive flexibility, right? How can we view things flexibly, right? You think this is fearful and that you've been restricted and that your life is horrible or whatever, but what's another way to look at it? How can we break out of that negative cycle and ask, is it really that bad? Is what I have concluded about this actually true? Right? Or what would it look like if what I have concluded about this is actually not true or not completely true? How would I act?
Yeah.
Right? How would I act if I were not the scared victim, but actually an agent of blessing, right? If you're a Christian, or an agent of positive change or whatever, if you're not, right? Whatever we call it, right? What would that look like? How would I act? What would I be doing? Right? And that can introduce that flexibility into that person's mindset, right? At least a little bit. That can be that toe in the door, and then we try to pull the door wider open.
Gotcha.
Is it the case that in times of mental health challenges that people are more open or less open to the idea of cognitive flexibility?
It's kind of both. Because if we think about it's kind of both, because I don't know if you guys heard of Maslow. Maslow has this model of hierarchy of needs, right? The triangle, right? And so people can start to think about their mindset and cognitive flexibility and outlook and perspective the more that they have the bottom layers kind of secure. Right.
Their
So
fundamental
if you're
physical needs, right?
Yeah. So if you're sick, right, if you're in the hospital, in the ICU, on a ventilator, on a respirator, then all right, I think, right, we've got to handle the bottom layer first, right? And also if you, as maybe you felt threatened, maybe you're helping one of your loved ones recover from the disease, or maybe a lot of people who got sick or passed away, or somebody in your family, maybe not you, but somebody close to you. And so there's a different sort of way that we can go about doing this, but it's both, right? People may be closed until they attain a certain level of security, right? So I think as Christians, we have to, you got to work the whole thing, right? You got to help people get to attain that security a little bit so that they can start thinking about these other things, right? So as Christians, I think we should also be, thinking about, okay, how can we help people who are sick? How can we help get equipment out to people, right? How can we start getting the bottom layers met so that people can start thinking about other things. And part of the other things is the gospel and what God is doing, and the reality that this virus is telling us about our world, which is maybe it's not so secure, right? Maybe it's not, and maybe the things that we've trusted in before, right? The things that we've trusted in before, maybe, I don't know, maybe they can't protect us as well as we thought, right? So who can, right?
That's really
what is
helpful.
the ultimate hope, right?
Yeah.
It's not this thing anymore. It's not even my life anymore, you know?
I think I actually have 3 cousins who are working directly with COVID patients. And then actually several of my family members have tested positive. But, we see kind of, I think a lot of the biggest strain is coming from, healthcare professionals, those on the front lines. I saw a really sad article in the New York Times about an ER doctor who committed suicide a few days ago, and she had just been kind of overwhelmed by all the death that she had seen, and by all accounts, she was actually a very sincere Christian. What are the ways in which maybe healthcare professionals might be uniquely impacted by coronavirus, and what are the ways that we can help those people who are kind of on the front lines, whether they're first responders or nurses or doctors?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of ways. My own sister is a physician in California, and she tested positive for the virus.
Wow.
And so, like, so I completely empathize with you. And I did read the article about the ER doctor and healthcare professional. And we have data on the stresses that healthcare professionals uniquely face from previous pandemics. SARS, MERS, Ebola, equine influenza. There's a really great piece out of King's College that was just published earlier this year in the UK. That's really, really interesting, and I can forward that to you guys too. But they're huge, right? Healthcare workers need to make like unfortunate decisions in an environment where they are constantly exposed, and in much of the world, not well enough protected, right? Having to reuse things that were honestly designed to be single use, right? Having to not have the protective equipment that they need, having to be breathed and coughed on and all of that. And having to, in that context and environment, make decisions like who gets a respirator and who doesn't, who gets to get admitted and who doesn't, who's sick enough and who isn't, and having to live with the consequences of those decisions, right? Like, you're not sick enough today to get into the ICU because I've only got 20 beds and there's a long line, right? So I may know you have the virus, I may think you're sick, and if you came like in December, I would be admitting you right now, but it's not December, it's February or it's March, and I don't have it, right? And so I have to turn you away knowing that may not go well for you. Knowing that may not go well for you, and knowing that may not go well in terms of the public health perspective too, because you're going and you're breathing and coughing and whatever, right? And touching, and I just can't, right? And so you're sitting with the knowledge of what that decision might mean for that person and for the community. And you're also sitting with this elevated baseline anxiety of, am I going to get sick? Am I going to bring whatever this is to the people that I love, right? And you're making these decisions. It's a lot of pressure, and it's unprecedented in our lifetime, right? It's unprecedented in its severity and scope, right? I mean, we can make arguments that Ebola had a better death rate or whatever, but in terms of the scope,
right? Nothing's been so global like this since at least Spanish flu, probably, right?
Yeah, which obviously none of us remember. So, but we would do well too, because the records coming out of that period actually are not as bad as we think. It's just that people don't have a great tendency to learn from history, unfortunately.
What do you mean by that? The records aren't as great as we think?
They're not as bad as we think. Like, actually, there's data coming out of
Gotcha.
the Spanish flu, yeah, for that pandemic from 1918, that actually shows us about why social distancing is important, why the congregation of large numbers of people is dangerous. But we don't learn as well.
What are some of the cultural differences? Because I mean, in the U.S., people are getting so restless. Actually having armed protests.
Yeah.
Georgia and Texas, and I don't know if I have the whole list, but there are states that are ending their lockdowns, sort of, what seems like prematurely, given we don't really have a good handle on testing and being able to contact trace and all this stuff. So what are some of the cultural differences that are leading to such a you know, uh, such a contrasted response in the U.S. versus China or other parts of the world?
Dude, man, you guys, how much time do you have? I mean, there's like, right, okay, come on, we're all Asian in this virtual
For sure.
room, right? So we can kind of, right, there's some profound differences, right? First of all, if we wanted to start politically, right, between China and the States, the US, and most of the Western world, right, there's fundamental political differences, right? So, and the government was able to take swift decision. And, if the Chinese government wants to lock down Wuhan, city of 11 million people, right? What do we have in the States that compares to that? Probably Manhattan, probably New York only, right? But like they want to lock down a city of 11 million people, seal the airports, seal the roads, stop the buses and the trains. They do it, and it's done that afternoon. Like, it's done that afternoon. Oh, but what about our company that needs to, what about, like, it's done, it's sealed. Deal with it, right? What about the economic impact? It's done. So you just have to swallow the pill. But the thing is, people also, and this is cultural difference, people obey better, right? People listen better. People go, all right, well, it's locked down, and then the different parts of society just got to do what they got to do, right? Like, I remember when the lockdown spread beyond Wuhan and started to encompass all of China, right? Huge companies, like huge travel companies and airlines, started to immediately do things like offer refunds free of charge, offer flight changes free of charge. The rest of society had to do what they had to do. Entire corporations and companies, went online, just had to do it. Nobody was prepared for it. Nobody thought that they needed to that extent. But there's a padlock on the front door now, so you got to do it, right? And people were able to understand that they needed to do this, right? Whether that understanding was just I need to do what my authority tells me to, or whether they actually understood why this was necessary, right? Because on the same day, it was this requirement to everybody wears a mask. Everybody. If you're outside of your home, you wear a mask. To the extent that if you weren't wearing a mask, people were gonna ticket you and bring you back to your, and to solve the problem, they gave people masks. There was this huge system that went down to distribute masks, and entire companies were reshifted from manufacturing cars, manufacturing air conditioners, to manufacturing masks, right?
Yeah.
And so there were these swift decisions, and the rest of the segments of population just had to do, like I said, what they had to do. Contrasted to the States, where the thought of locking down Los Angeles to this extent is almost inconceivable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how could we do that?
Maybe even people would argue that it's unconstitutional or illegal,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
sure, but even if it were, how could we envision that happen? We would not be able to picture that happening. Whereas in China, though we hadn't had to do it before, we could picture it happening.
Wow.
And in Korea, it did much the same thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a good
Korea
point.
is-
It's not just China, which has
It's not
very
just China.
which has an authoritarian government, but it's we see the other Asian countries. Like, I'm in Taiwan, for example, a very healthy democracy. Korea is much the same way. Taiwan has 6 deaths, you know, and in what's in
Yeah.
the country that's maybe politically, economically, culturally, geographically, maybe the closest country to China.
That's crazy.
You know, so it's we can't just say that it's a government, you know, communist kind of authoritarian type of thing. I mean, there's got to be
No,
cultural
that's
issues that are
not.
going
Yeah,
on.
Yeah.
it's both and.
Yeah.
But I think it's profoundly important that the cultural issues, right? In Korea too, I mean, Taiwan famously is an example of the way that people, you know, of the way that a country can do it right, or a territory can do it right, however you view it. But like the also, like, Korea has been like sending care packages to everybody, and like sending food and toilet paper, and I mean, it's all over social media, right? Like, but technically, yes, civil liberties were impinged upon,
Sure.
right? Movement was restricted. People didn't have the freedoms that they had before, right? But I think that there was this fundamental ethos in the culture, right? That caused people to say, okay, you know what? I'm gonna take this restriction for the greater good, or out of a cultural, you know, motivation to obey or something, right? But I'm gonna take this for now, you know.
Yeah.
And that is not as present in other parts of the world.
So unfortunately, like, I think we've seen that in America, a lot of conservative evangelicals have been sort of downplaying the threat of the virus. You know, even, I mean, the media highlights certain examples of churches and pastors that refuse to comply with the stay-at-home orders and continue to meet, you know, in person and whatnot. So I'm wondering, like, do you find similar strains of thoughts among Christians in China, where people kind of dismiss or downplay, you know, what is it about America or American Christianity that makes this kind of uniquely a challenge?
You know, the simple answer is no, we don't see that here in China among the Christians. We don't see that among the non-Christians. We really don't. And I was talking to some people about why that is, and my own wife. And, you know, I think that in America, sometimes certain aspects of Christianity get conflated with like other things. And like, for example, in the States, right, I think that there's this pursuit of happiness that is written into the DNA of our culture in the States, that it's a fundamental human right? Life, liberty, right? And sort of this pursuit of our own happiness. And I think a lot of the fatigue and the frustration and like all these reactions come from the idea that we should be happy all the time and enjoy the maximum amount of happiness, and whether the happiness is from freedom or whatever, sort of all the time. And there's high expectations of our own comfort, quote unquote, in that way, if you will, right? And I think that to an extent, Chinese people and people from other cultures are able to process through things like restrictions and stuff like that better, because there's not the same type of expectation that we will be happy all the time, right? There's not that expectation. Like in a lot of Asian cultures, like recent history has been one of pain and struggle and severe trauma, right? War, right? Yeah, famine, like huge things that have blessedly not happened in the States, right? And I'm not wishing that it does, and it is God's provision and blessing that it hasn't. However, I think that we live in this false expectation of what the world, this fallen world, is actually like, right? It's not heaven. We can't expect heaven to the extent that we expect that this world is heaven. To that same extent, there will be idolatry and people, right? Like, it's not, this world ain't heaven, and it's not gonna be, right? And so I think that there's this value in this pursuit of happiness that has something to do with like the way people are not able to accept that kind of restriction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do like, I'm sure the Christians out there are they aware of how Christians are acting out here? Like, pastors who refuse to like close their doors, things like that.
I mean,
If they
it
are
happened in
aware,
Korea.
how do they view that? What do they think? What are you guys thinking out there? Especially like maybe the
Well,
locals.
a lot of Christians are viewing, are taking a look at that and seeing that Christianity is conflated with other
So
things.
it's really clear, I guess, in China, like from your
It's
outside
pretty clear.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Christians can't be political or that we can't translate our faith into the culture, because we can and we should, right? I'm not saying that we should, be drawing those bright lines necessarily. We should be living out our faith in all of the ways, and the places that God has put us in. But like, I think that I know that Christians here take a look at what's happening in the States and go, wow, it's kind of, some concepts are getting combined.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that the American church might be wise to kind of take a look at that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. And to say, okay, well, have we been conflating it? Are we conflating it? How can we kind of deconstruct this a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think there's a reason why the church is like exploding here in China. Right. And the faith and the gospel is exploding here in China. And I don't know that it's doing the same thing. I haven't been in the States for 7 years. Right. But at least up until the point I left, right, we were struggling in the American church with huge decline. Right. Like when people graduate from high school.
Right.
Yep.
Right. People stop going to church. Right.
It's worse
and people,
now.
yeah. And people find that, so I think this is there's some serious questions that we as the American church have to ask ourselves.
It's like our faith has been syncretized with maybe some of, like, I don't know, some of the other values that are just in our popular culture.
And yeah, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be, right? It should.
Yeah.
But which one are we going to be pushing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are we going to be pushing at the end of the day? Right? It's not legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, I'm not saying that you're right. There are people whose job that you do that. I'm going to get in trouble. But you know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the worldview that God has given us, right?
Right.
The examples that God has given us in the Bible, are struggle, right, and pain, and we need to be able to address people's real struggle and real pain.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think there's so much to unpack in what we've been talking about, and it's really helpful actually to hear that outside of the U.S. it's actually really clear that this conflation is happening. One thing that I wanted to touch on was one of the big narratives that we hear in the U.S. about China is just kind of the steady loss of civil liberties that's going on, and especially maybe particularly so with religious civil liberties and things like that. Is that something that I would imagine maybe with the lockdown that there might be even a more opportunity for that kind of authority or assertion of control. Is there anything like that you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean that has been an issue here in China for a while, and the fear affects everyone, right? And in my view, it's a fear-based reaction. That the powers that be here are afraid that Christianity is equated with political influence, which it is, to be fair, in many parts of the world, right?
Sure.
So, if we just want to be fair about it, it kind of is, right? So I don't particularly knock that, but it stokes the fear, right? The fear of, if we allow churches to grow unchecked, we are allowing foreign influence back in. And remember, the context here is that this this part of the world has not been free from from negative, imperialistic, paternalistic influences, right? Neither has the West, right? If we think about it from a Native American perspective, for example. But anyway, like, you know, it hasn't been free. There are very recent pains, right, and struggles about that. And so the government here is in the same way that they're saying we will not allow the coronavirus back. You know, they're saying we are not going to put ourselves back in those days anymore, right? I live in Shanghai. I'm sitting in Shanghai right now. Shanghai was famously partitioned, right? Shanghai was famously, I live an hour and a half away from Nanjing, which was famously, right? I mean, the very, very recent pains. So it's fear, right? And it's conflation of, you know, it's an equating of Christianity with Western influence, Western political influence, and cultural influence that is combined. And so it is contributing to the approach or the attitude that is here, that is held by the powers that be, you know?
That's
and it's really like, the more that we as Christians can day by day show that perfect love drives out fear, right? Perfect love drives out fear. Christianity, the gospel, is not the same thing as democracy versus communism, or socialism versus capitalism, right? It's not the same thing as this political access or the economic access. It's not the same, right?
Yeah.
People have tried to like use it to push those things before. The people have tried to use it to push agendas before, but it's not the same. At its core, perfect love drives out fear. So we got to say, all right, how can we show that love? You know, how can we show that love? We always want someone to blame, right? Like in the States, right? Like this conversation about who's to blame. Should we be suing China, right? There's like a state that's like suing China.
Yeah.
Or, you know, how can we like punish China for not controlling the virus, right? And we all want someone to blame so that it absolves us, right? If we blame them, it absolves us. It's like this, right? Like and just like the healing of the man born blind, where there's this argument about who sinned. Was he sin? Did his parents sin? Because we got to know. And Jesus is like, well, you actually don't need to know. Like the focus is actually not on that. The focus is, how is the glory of God going to be displayed through this man's life, right? That's the focus.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And like, you know, like we gotta bring that focus, you know, back to what are we going to do as a church? What are we going to do as Christians? How are we going to show the glory of God? How are we going to drive out fear? You know, how can we show people that there's only one perfect love out there, is the love of the gospel? Not this other stuff, not the lies, right? Dare I say, from political entities or economic agendas, right? It's not that.
Is there anything that you feel like needs to be talked about that we haven't been talking about, or that, you know, maybe the narrative or the media in America, you know, isn't bringing to the forefront? Is there anything that comes to mind that you really want to?
Geez, I feel like I jumped on enough soapboxes during this conversation. I'm sorry, and it's so heavy. I was thinking, okay, like how can? But you know, it's serious, and I'm passionate about it. So I guess I get on the soapbox and I just go.
For sure.
I mean, I don't. You know, I think we touched on a lot of stuff. I think that what I would leave people with is this: look, there's always hope, right? The darkness is real, but Jesus promised us that the darkness will not overcome the light, right? It will not overcome the light, right? The church is built on a rock, and the very gates of hell will not overcome it, right? These are promises. Jeremy Lin put this really well in a recent Instagram post. But like, and we have to hold to that, and to say, look, there's hope, right? There is hope. It just might not come in the form of a political entity or an economic system or like whatever. it's gonna, if we want to talk about true hope, it's only in, you know, in our triune God, but there is hope, right? And so how can we get ourselves there? How can we get other people there, right? And work in this hierarchy. How can we be used by God? How can we push this forward? And we got to work on all levels of that hierarchy, that triangle, Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah,
Man.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
All right. Well, hey, thank you, George, so much for your time.
Yeah.
It's actually a holiday for you
George.
guys in China, and so we appreciate you
Oh,
taking
yeah, it's
time
Labor
out of
Day
your
here.
morning.
Oh man.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you're working on
Dude,
your
that was
holiday.
so awesome. Thank you so much, George.
Yeah.
No, this is fun. This I don't view this as work. This is fun. I really appreciate you guys, and just the blessing of your work and of your podcast, and just really pray and ask God to just maximize and multiply that, you know. So I really appreciate that you guys had me on. I feel really privileged and blessed.
Well,
be
we're
able to-
really thankful that you're our first guest. So yeah, we appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the honor is ours. Thank you so much.
Seriously, we
Absolutely.
really appreciate
Take
it.
care.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Alrighty.
Wow. All right, guys. That was, dude, Stephen, thank you for inviting George. That was awesome. That was so like helpful to me. But I want to hear what you guys have to say. Maybe we can take a minute and let's just talk about, just let's give a response to all the stuff that he said. Andrew, I mean, do you want to go first? Why don't you go first, Andrew?
Sure. Yeah, just to echo Daniel, I think George was amazing, like his perspective and especially his experience. So it was great to hear from George. There was one part that was like a little bit I'll preface it by saying I agree with what he said. It's just that I don't know, I think I've been on this deconstruction of Christianity journey for like the past like 15 years, and so even
That's a lot of deconstructing.
it's a lot of deconstruct. Well, there's a lot of bull
No,
to
you're right,
wade
you're right.
through. But the thing he said about, because I asked this question about non-Christians, like how do you talk about pain and suffering in general? But we're talking about coronavirus. How do you discuss this horrible thing that's happening to a lot of people with non-Christians? And I know that science says, oh, just think positively, or like think about the hope, or for Christians it's like, oh well, Jesus is in control. I agree with it. I'm a pastor. I agree with it. I think that sucks as an answer for a lot of people. And so for me that was hard to like. Even now, if I were to meet someone, hey, I just lost my dad to coronavirus, I just walk up to them and be like, hey man, think about what you can do. Like, just think positive, right? How can you grow in this time? It just seems, I know that's not what George was saying, but I feel like a lot of Christians will take that stance with tragedy in general.
Right.
Hey,
right.
what is God teaching you? And sometimes I feel like, oh, that's not a great way to, respond to grieving and like loss.
So I think I thought his point was more like, if you're going through some sort of challenge, mental health challenge yourself, cognitive dissonance is like a technique, right, to be able to get through that. But it sounds like you're kind of saying, I guess maybe that's not the best way to respond to somebody that's grieving. So I guess what would be kind of your, how have you been able to process, like, what's a way to counsel people or listen to people, that are going through that grieving?
I mean, the thing is, I don't have a good answer.
So
for a lot of these things that I have a problem with, it's usually like I don't have a good answer to this.
I think I hear what you're saying, and I think I agree. Like, we have to be careful to get what George was talking about, and then just go to everybody who's like legitimately suffering, and just be like, hey, cheer up, everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
And so that's why actually off air I asked George a question.
Yeah,
about,
your question was
how
good.
do we help, like, healthcare providers who are going through this, like, just this ridiculous amount of stress, and I don't want to go up to them and be like, hey, like, look at the bright side of things,
Yeah.
And I think that's and I think like you're saying, Stephen, there is this obviously there is this like this profound effect of being like kind of positive or having this positive perspective and hope. But George's, I love George's answer. It was so helpful to me. He said, you know, for people who are really going through hard times, a lot of times the best you can do is just to be there and listen to them and kind of let them grieve, let them just share what they're going through. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think it's good that you bring that up because I think our audience should know that. I don't think George was saying at all, and I think Andrew, you agree, right? He wasn't saying like,
oh, not at all,
just to like, and I think a lot of Christians sadly are doing this.
That's what I'm saying.
Where people are like suffering,
yeah,
but we're like, hey guys, like it's okay, you know?
Yeah, God, you know, everything has a reason, or like God's plan for you. But then when you say that, it's, yeah, I think what George said brought up a bigger thing about just Christians in general, how like cheap their responses to things are. So I'm not saying George thinks this, but it's something I hear all the time of like, this is going to get weird, but like even all of us, and George included, like we're privileged. We're very fortunate. Right. Like we don't have it as bad. And so for us to be here being like, well, you know, God's working on you and he has a plan for you. We don't know. Like we're not in it. Really. We know some people.
You mean we don't know what it's like?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not in the trenches. We're not like you know, our next meal is not a question. You know, we're all doing fine. And so yeah, just, you know, it was set uncomfortably, but I knew what he was talking about, but yeah, sometimes I think we need a better way of talking, or I guess listening.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, that kind of, do you mind if I kind of go?
Oh, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like it kind of related to my point, which is, well, first of all, I feel like I've been dissatisfied with the way I've seen a lot of Christians reacting, which is like, you know, basically like kind of like this is just like a temporary, you know, inconvenience, and it's all going to be over soon, you know, so just hang in there. When I think, you know, the scientists are, at least from what I'm aware of, are saying that a guy named Michael Osterholm said it really well. He's a epidemiologist that was on Joe Rogan's show, and he said a lot people are talking about this and preparing as if this is going to be a coronavirus blizzard, when in fact we need to be preparing for a coronavirus winter. You know, like this will be around for a long time, seasons. You know, and I, so in that sense, yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying, Andrew, that like the response has been a little bit trite, and you know, something that not just the Christian response, but I feel like how American society is responding. I feel like it's been kind of disconnected from reality.
100%.
And I guess it reminds me of a story. We knew this guy named June Park. You remember June, Daniel? He told me this story of when he was a kid. He was having like a peanut shooting contest with his friend. So they were both sticking peanuts up their nose, their nostril, and then seeing how far they could shoot it out of their nostrils, right?
Yeah, Andrew and I do that every week.
Okay, I mean, you were probably part of this story. Anyway, so his friend he and his friend were like duking it out, and then June was like, okay, for this, like it was like his last chance to shoot his peanut, and so he was like, I'm just gonna go ham on this one, and so he was like, and as he was about to shoot it, he had inhaled so hard that the peanut actually shot into his like sinus, right?
That's tight.
And so, yeah, and so it was actually like kind of a serious situation, but he didn't want to tell his grandma what had happened because he knew that his grandma was going to give him a beating, right? And so instead of dealing with it, he just kind of hid the situation, and for like 6 days he went to school with a peanut in his sinus, and then finally like it started getting all infected and inflamed and stuff, and then finally one day his grandma was washing his face and then noticing that every time she touched his nose he would be crying, and then she found out, okay, what happened? Oh, there's a peanut in his nose, and he had to go to the ER to get it like removed, like surgically, right?
Oh my gosh.
And in the end he still got a beating, you know what I mean? So I think my point is, you know, whether you take the beating up front. Not that we
condone any of that stuff.
Okay, yes, that's we need to say that. But whether you take the beating up front or whether you take it, you know, afterwards, you're still going to take a beating. And I feel like with
I didn't know where you're going with that. I was like, oh.
I think you're gonna talk about the peanut or the
Oh my
infection. Or...
gosh.
no, man, it's about taking
Dude,
your beatings.
That's
right?
life. That's life.
He said swallow. I guess what resonated with me was when he said we got to swallow the pill, right? And like in America, it's like we have this. I feel like society, leadership, whatever, is sort of having this sort of magical thinking, like this is gonna go away, and so let's reopen things back up. And other countries have been able to reopen as a result of taking their lumps, as a result of taking their beatings. I mean, I'm in Taiwan right now. Taiwan has been business as usual for the last 2 months. And initially they had somewhat of a lockdown where they closed schools and stuff like that for 3 weeks. But they did a really, really good job of social distancing. Everyone here is wearing a mask. I mean, and they did a great job of sort of catching this thing before it started to kind of scale, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, America is kind of way past that point. And yet we want to kind of have the privilege of kind of opening things back up. And I understand that people are suffering. I understand that people need to get to work and all that, right? But I also think that George made a good point when he said we're not willing to swallow the pill. Mm-hmm. And I see that sort of as like a cultural dynamic in this whole pandemic, at least in the way that it's kind of taking shape in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. And I think for me too, when I asked him, I asked him like, what do like Chinese Christians, for example, like what do they think when they see us, like when they see us fighting over all these things and all these conflicts about what is to them so clear. And I think just realizing that, science is clear. Most of the world is clear. Like they know what's fact.
Non-whites.
And what's that we are having this, that we're struggling with this. It made me really, I think I highlighted when he talked about conflation. Like the conflation of Christianity with X, Y, and Z, whether it's something like a political system, whether it's various forms of like idolatry and like this so-called American dream. And I think it was just really eye-opening to me, in a shocking way actually, to kind of see, man, how much is our Christianity in America conflated with things that are not of God. That aren't what they're supposed to be. So,
90%.
I mean, maybe, seriously, like and I think, and that's one thing I would encourage our listeners and our viewers, whatever side you're on, to think about some of those things that George is saying and listen to his perspective. So yeah, maybe let's just wrap up our show, guys. Just how about this? Just any last words or thoughts you want to share, maybe one or two sentences with our wonderful audience today. Andrew, what do you want to say, man? Take it away, bro.
Let's go reverse order.
All right, fine. I'll go. I already said it. I'll start. I already said it. Hey, I really hope you guys, again, regardless of what kind of perspectives you came into this, I hope you guys just really listen and think about it. We're not trying to create fights or division. If anything, we're trying to create unity. We're hoping that we can really be together through good information, through biblical information and perspectives. And yeah, let's talk about this. Let's actually listen to each other. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, for me, I think, this whole coronavirus thing has been, I know a lot of people probably don't know anybody that has it. For me, I have 3 cousins that are working the front lines with COVID patients. One of them got infected. Her husband got infected. They're newlyweds. And then I just found out, I don't know if I told you, Andrew, but my grandpa's tested positive. He's 96 years old and he lives in a assisted living facility. Thank God so far his symptoms are mild or even maybe asymptomatic. Maybe it's a false positive, or maybe he's just at the beginning of the incubation period. But
yeah.
It needs to be said that as people are talking about their freedoms and things like that, I think actually what's missing in the Christian response or in the dialogue is, what about loving your neighbor? There's lots of people that who are at risk. My mom has rheumatoid arthritis, and she takes hydroxychloroquine, and now she can't get as much as she needs to. And there's an aspect of that where also, we need to think about our neighbors, like from an economic perspective. I know a lot of people are paycheck to paycheck, and Andrew said, we're not lacking for our next meal, but there are people that are, and so that needs to part of the conversation as well. But I just think that to flex on our individual rights so hard right now, I think is sort of
That's good.
maybe not the most loving way to go about everything.
Yeah. Dang, man. I feel like we should have mentioned some Bible stuff if we have biblical perspective, but maybe that's for another time.
That's
you right now, dude.
Bring it home, baby.
John 3:16.
There you go. Hey, there you go.
I think, I just want to end with, contrary to everything I said previously, we should have hope in these times.
No, tell us. Come on, man.
I think I say that because that's something I struggle with a lot. I tend to be like a systems thinker. Like I can't help but zoom out and look at like societal issues or, systems of violence or oppression. And so I regularly get very downcast and like very hopeless with what we can even do to change the tide or, what normal Christians can do to help the situation. But George put a very important note out there, especially at the end where he says like, what we can do is meet the needs of people. Like however you can, especially with Stephen saying, with people around you, we meet those needs and then we start rewriting stories. And I think anyone can do that. You don't need, a huge platform. You don't need millions of followers, but you can do that with your church, with your neighbors, with your families. And so, for me, that was the biggest takeaway from today. And I really appreciate George being with us and being able to say that from China, from Wuhan. So
he's in Shanghai, but he's doing some with Wuhan people.
Wuhan people.
Yeah, thank you guys. That's so awesome. And it's a reminder, of all that's going on, as you guys said so aptly. Man, isn't that supposed to be our number one concern right now? Is how to love our neighbor, right? And so I hope you guys do that. All you are listening, I hope that can be all of our number one concern. Is how to glorify God by just loving our neighbors and whatever that looks like. Hope this podcast today helps you do that a little bit more. Thank you guys for joining. We're so thankful. Give us that time. Yes.
Dude, before we go, bro, you can cut this out if this is stupid, but I just thought bringing perspectives that are a little bit different, and I just wanted to tell you something about Taiwan. Like a little bit of like, you guys know at Costco they have like... You guys know at Costco they have like prepared foods like those turkey wraps and whatever.
Oh,
you know
my
what I'm talking
gosh.
about?
What are you gonna do?
Those
Bring
are
it out,
cheapo.
dude.
All right, look.
Bring it out.
In Taiwan they have sushi. And it's like really good. Actually, I can't pick it up right now, but it's like tuna, scallop.
Why can't you pick it up right now? What are your hands doing?
All right, look. I'll just show you right now. I'll show you a picture afterwards. Okay, but this is what I got at Costco.
Oh my gosh.
It's really good.
That looks amazing.
And it's like they have like a cornucopia of Pan Asian delights. Like they have sushi, they have bibimbap, they have Japanese ramen. They have like so many things that I wish they would have.
Dang.
Like their meat section is like the premium Korean all you can eat barbecue, like all those cuts. So I'm just saying, like,
that's cultural appropriation.
Dude, not everything in America is the best. You know what I mean?
Oh, literally almost nothing.
All right, so welcome now to Steven's Mukbang. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in.
I thought you just cut that part out.
Thank you.
We'll cut it in right where your mouth is full randomly.
Thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe.
Oh, you're actually going to say that?
Yeah, why not, dude?
Smash that like button.
Smash it,
Let us know
dude.
what you think in the comments.
Let us know what you guys think. We'd love to have a dialogue with you guys. If any of you guys have questions, you actually want to talk with us, you can reach us at our Gmail, which is reoriented.show@gmail.com. I'll say it again, reoriented.show@gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, it is down below. Or you can check us out on our Facebook at reoriented.show. Okay, Facebook is at reoriented.show. Again, all that stuff is on the bottom. All right, we love you guys. Have a blessed week or day, whatever it is. Bye. Peace out.